It is springtime! We made it! And you might be interested in starting your first square foot garden or your first edible garden of any kind. I know from personal experience that it can be unbelievably overwhelming to try to dive in. It just feels like there's so much to know, there's so many things to do, and it's really hard to know where to start. So I wanted to share with you some of my favorite tips for starting a square foot garden, for planning your square foot garden and getting it in the ground for absolute beginners. So if you are interested in gardening, I would suggest square foot gardening as a great way to start. Basically, the idea is you plot out your garden in 1 foot squares, and every square can hold X amount of plants. So for example, if you want to plant something like radishes, you can plant 16 radishes in 1 square. If you want to plant something larger like tomatoes, you're going to need 4 of your squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, so a little 4-foot block to plant a large tomato plant. So what you can do is with whatever space that you have, you can make a very productive and easy to manage garden using this method. Number one, I thought that in order to start a garden, I would need to have a huge yard or lots of land or an acre of land, and that's 100% not true. Last year we were living in an apartment and I didn't have a sunny patio and I didn't have a sunny window. So we decided to sign up for a community garden plot. And it was a wonderful experience for our family. We got a little 12 by 12 foot plot. So if you're living someplace and you think, I don't even have any sun outside on my porch or my patio or on my balcony or my window or whatever, this is something that you might look into. There are lots of community organizations or parks and recs that you might have in your area. Do just a quick Google search of your area and community garden, and you might be surprised to find out what's available in your own neighborhood. If you just have a patio and you only have a couple of feet, this method can be done in a container. You can portion it out into the squares and you can really get a lot growing just in that kind of a space. If you're like me and you've got a small backyard, which we have for the very first time this year, we are doing a couple of small garden plots. So we're restarting our whole garden from scratch. So the first thing I want to say about planning your garden, if you've never done it before, is think about what you want in it. That's simple. Make a wish list. Talk to the other people in your family or the other people in your household and come up with some things that you'd really like to grow. If everybody really loves tomatoes, plant some tomatoes. If nobody in your family likes cabbage, don't plant a bunch of cabbage. Just because you've heard that it's easy to grow or maintain, don't do it. Like, if nobody's gonna eat it, don't plant a bunch of something. What I did was, in my little handy dandy planner, this is super messy, but I'm gonna show you anyway. We started a garden wish list. So I talked to everybody, I talked to my kids, we talked about what we have grown in the past and what we would like to grow this time, maybe some things we wanted to establish now that we have our own yard, and we created a wish list of what we want to put in our garden. The second thing you want to do is to sketch it out. So know what your space is going to be, take a look, see where you can put it, see how large it can be, and then either using some graph paper or a pencil and paper, I use this notebook that has these little dots on it, and I got a ruler and I got a pencil and I sketched out my squares. So for our garden this year, you can see we have 4 beds, and they're 4 feet by 8 feet each. And I'll tell you a little bit later about how we built these beds for super cheap. My tip number 3 is to utilize companion planting. Because you're planting these things so close together, this is an excellent way to keep weeds and stuff under control, which also can keep some pests under control, but also to make your plants happy by planting them next to other plants that they want to be next to. So companion planting basically refers to the beneficial relationship between different kinds of plants. For example, tomatoes love to be planted next to things like basil, beans, cucumbers, borage, marigolds. And while we're on the topic of borage and marigolds, these are beneficial flowers. Borage is a very large, sort of prickly plant with gorgeous purple blooms, and it is wonderful in edible gardens because it's great for attracting pollinators and for deterring some pests. The same thing is true of marigolds. So by the same token, there are plants that are great to be next to your other plants, and there are plants that you don't want to have together. So with tomatoes, tomatoes do not like to be planted next to cabbage or Brussels sprouts or corn. There are different reasons for these negative relationships, including shared pests or shared nutrients in the soil that one plant might take from another. But it's a great idea, once you got your list of what you want to plant, to just do a quick Google search of companion plants for cucumbers, companion plants for lettuce, or whatever. It'll give you an idea of how you might want to arrange your plants in your plot so that you can plant. You see I have my tomatoes next to some marigolds and some cukes. So this is going to hopefully maximize the benefit for those guys. Another thing to keep in mind when you're planting your garden is if you're planting something that has a short time from seed to harvest, something like radishes, for example. Radishes really only take maybe 5 weeks from seed to harvest. That is a pretty quick turnaround time, which also makes them a great one for beginners because it's immediately satisfying. So think about ways that you could reuse the square after the radishes are done. Maybe you want to replant some radishes there, or maybe you'd like to use that square for something else. Maybe something that you need to plant a little later into the summer when the weather is warmer and the sun is hotter. Or you could just kind of mix it up. Maybe this time you want to try some lettuce in that spot. Another thing in that same vein is to think about succession planting. That means planting things spaced out a little bit apart. Last year I made this mistake, and I'm gonna be honest, I did the same thing again this year. I planted my radishes and we really like them, but I planted a lot of squares of them all at the same time. What does that mean? They're all going to be ready at the same time. So if you aren't quite sure what you're gonna do with 60 radishes when you pull them all out of the ground at the same time, you might think about succession planting. So that means planting some, waiting about 2 or 3 weeks, and then planting another batch of them. That way you'll get a continual harvest. Things like lettuce and spinach, these sort of quicker crops like that, are going to be good ideas to succession plant. Also some herbs like cilantro or dill. You might want to think about spacing them out a little bit through the season so you get a more steady harvest. Okay, so you understand what you want to put in the ground. Now you need to know when to do it. That means you need to know your garden zone. Every place is broken up into a garden zone. You can find your garden zone by doing a Google search. Again, thank you, Google. And you can put in your zip code or your area, and you can find out what your garden zone. Our garden zone is 8B. This information will tell you when your average last frost date is. This refers to the average date when you're going to get your last freeze of the winter starting into the spring. So for us, the date is April 1st. Now, that will tell you when you need to plant certain crops. So some need to be planted before your frost date. Some early crops like snap peas or snow peas, lettuces, radishes, these things can be planted in a colder time while you might still have a little bit of a freeze. Some things need to wait until after. They do not tolerate frost well. So get to know what your date is, and then you will know when you should be planting things in the ground. Now that you know when to plant things, you need to know where to plant them. So if you do not already have a garden plot, you can build one. What we decided to do was to build out a garden bed right on the ground. We shoveled out all of the grass, pulled up any weeds that we had there, which were pretty plentiful, and we built an inexpensive wooden frame to mark the garden bed. We used these $3 untreated cedar fence boards that we found at Home Depot. They were 8 feet long, so we got 3 per bed. So one long 8 foot on one side, one long 8 foot on the other side. Cut one of them in half. That gave us a 4 foot top, so that gave us a 4 by 8 foot rectangle. And then my husband just nailed them together. Super easy. Put a little piece of 2x in the corner there to keep them together. We added in some organic compost and some raised bed soil mix to fill in and amend the soil. And then we used some garden twine, stapled it, and marked out the squares. The garden bed itself only cost about $10 or so to build. So this was a really inexpensive way to do this. If you've got a container that you're doing this in, again, you can use the same idea with the twine and just mark out your squares. It's just a really cheap way to do it. Now the really fun part, you get to plant it. Put the stuff in the ground. Get your seeds, get your starts, whichever way you want to go. Seeds are obviously less expensive. Starts are a little bit faster. We kind of do a mix of each depending on what the plan is. But what you need to know is how many can go in a square. So I use this square foot gardening guide. This is by Mel Bartholomew. It's a great resource. And there's a great section in the back that talks about each plant and how many can go in each square. So if you're wanting to use this book, I'll put a link below so you can check it out, or you can get it from your library. But this will give you a really easy guide for how many of each seed or how many of each start you need to put in your square. If the thing you want to plant is not in this guide, no big deal. Just look at your seed packet or look at the information on the starts that you're getting, or again, do a Google search of it and see what the plant spacing is. If it says your plant spacing is 12 inches, 1 square. So you know that you can put one of that plant in a square. If it says something like, 6 inches, you can get 2 of them in your square. So one thing I like to do is I like to write how many seeds will go in each square right on the packet. So that way when I come out to the garden, I don't have to do so much cross-referencing. So this one is my cilantro seeds, and it's gonna be a 2 seed in 1 square situation. And for these, I'm gonna do kind of a diagonal because I've got 2 in here. There's a 1, maybe 1 and 2. Once you've got everything in the ground, you're going to want to label what it is. Last year, I went the popsicle stick route. I just wrote the name of the plant or the herb on a popsicle stick and stuck it in the ground so I knew, especially if you're planting from seeds, because trust me, as much as you think you're gonna remember what you put there, you're not gonna remember. And when the sprouts start to come up, it's a little bit tricky to distinguish them, especially if you've never seen it before, because a carrot sprout doesn't necessarily look like what a full-grown carrot green looks like. This year, I got something that hopefully I'll be able to reuse. I got these little guys. They have a little copper plate like this and these long stakes. And I'm gonna use these for my garden markers this year. Hopefully I'll be able to reuse these, and so they'll save me a little money in the long run. I thought they looked really lovely also. A little bit more expensive than a popsicle stick, but I'll put a link to these below if you're interested in these, and I'll let you know how they hold up over time, because hopefully our garden will continue to flourish for many years to come, just like yours. So my last tip for starting your square foot garden or your edible garden from scratch as a beginner is to have a little faith. Trust the seeds, trust the plants. Your job is to help them grow. They know what to do. They have been doing it since the beginning of time. So have a little faith. Even if you've never grown anything before, trust me, something is probably gonna grow. Will everything you plant grow? Probably not. And that's okay. You're gonna learn a whole lot. And you're gonna find out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you like, what you don't like, and it's absolutely okay to have a total failure. Last year we planted cucumbers and they ended up like this. Have fun and have some faith, and know that you are planting the freshest, most nutritious food for you and your family grown right in your own space with your own two hands. I hope that this helps you get started with your square foot garden or with your edible garden. If you're starting your journey, please follow along with me by subscribing so that we can go on our journey together. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.